Hello and welcome to the 2025 Sustainable Development Impact Meetings here at the World Economic Forum at the annual gathering of the UN General Assembly. My name is Andrew Desiderio. I'm Senior Congressional Reporter at Punchbowl News, where we cover the power, people, and politics that drive the decision-making in our nation's capital. I'm pleased to be joined today by Congressman Gregory Meeks of New York, Congresswoman Young Kim of California, and Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island. You can follow along with the conversation with the hashtag SDIM25. All right, I'm joined now by Congressman Gregory Meeks of the 5th District here in New York State. Congressman Meeks, thank you so much for being here. You're also the ranking member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. You were the chairman at one point. A very powerful panel in the House of Representatives. We are here in what is described as your backyard because you represent Queens, that's right?
That's correct. You know, Queens is the gateway to New York and the United States of America, right through Kennedy Airport, which is part of the 5th Congressional District of New York.
There you go, and that's why we see all the planes of the foreign leaders parked there. It's always an interesting sight to see this week during UNGO week. Well, thank you so much for being here. I want to dive right in. I know you met earlier today with the new president of Syria, President Ahmed al-Shara. There's a big conversation happening on Capitol Hill right now about whether to repeal the economic sanctions under the Caesar Act that were put in place when the civil war began, when the Assad regime was in power. Can you describe what the meeting was like, and what is your hope right now of getting those sanctions repealed? I know it's a bipartisan effort, something that, in general, Democrats and the Trump administration are aligned on.
Well, it was a very good meeting. It's an introductory meeting. I think that one of the things that I gained out of it, I need to make sure that I have the opportunity to go visit. That's important. Senator Shaheen was there, and she has been to Damascus, recently, and I might have to do the same. He made the case for getting rid of the sanctions, that he's trying to move the country forward. I made the case of, I used the words of Ronald Reagan, actually, trust but verify, and that we need to have that dialogue. I need to see and to make sure that we're going to be moving they're going to be moving in a direction that brings people together, especially some of the religious or minorities that are in the region, that I'm hopeful. And I want him to be able to succeed because it will make a difference in the region. But the wording and what we're looking at with regards to what may be included in the NDAA, I have to review and look at it to make sure that there's some incentive for them to continue to make the progress and to make sure that we're going in the direction that will be positive for peace in the region. But I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to look at it, and then we're going to make a determination. We're going to continue having a conversation and dialogue. So it was a good opening meeting. You mentioned trust but verify, the idea being that, President al-Shara was once an avowed terrorist declared by the United States. He was a member of al-Qaeda, a member of ISIS at one time as well. At this stage, based on your conversations with your colleagues, do they have a similar level of, again, not, I wouldn't maybe use the word trust, but sort of willingness to hear them out in their position, and the argument that repealing these sanctions will actually lead to a more stable Syria and make sure that those terrorist groups cannot reconstitute? I think it's divided. I think that depending upon which member that you're talking to, at least on the House side, I see that they've reached some bipartisan agreement on the Senate side. Right. And so that's why it was important for me to meet so that I can make that determination. And I think that, when I say it is divided, there's some Democrats that are hardliners on that as opposed to others. The same thing on the Republican Party. Right. So we've got to have that dialogue and understanding so that we can try to move together. It's hard. But I, often think, and I'll make references to probably several times to Mr. Nelson Mandela, who was considered by the United States to be a terrorist, as well as the South African government. Mm-hmm. But when you negotiate something that's going to be different, you hope that they have the same moral courage and focus that a Nelson Mandela had when he became the president of South Africa. So there's got to be a leader, and it seems as though he's been the chosen leader, and let's see what happens. And so you leave the opening for a better Syria through his leadership.
You mentioned Nelson Mandela just now. You also had a chance to meet with the president of South Africa, President Ramaphosa. Can you talk a little bit about that? What was your focus? What were your objectives during that sit-down?
Well, of course, President Trump has unfortunately leveled 30% tariffs on South Africa, which would be devastating to their economy, devastating to some American companies, devastating to the continent of Africa in general because of the economy in South Africa. So that was the first and foremost thing that we talked about, was trying to see where they could ultimately land in regards to tariffs and what it means to the economy of South Africa. I know what it means to the economy of the United States of America, because it would be devastating for our U.S. hard workers and taxpayers. So that was one of the lead part of the conversation, as well as within a week or so, the expiration of AGOA. And that we need that to be reauthorized, and again, how devastating that would be to the South Africa and the entire continent. And he talked about the historic ties that the United States has had with South Africa, and we need to make sure we continue in the positive way, because we had negative ties under the apartheid regime. But we were able to move forward and work closely together. So we don't want to go back to those ways in which we had a negative and wrong viewpoint of South Africa. So that was part and parcel of what the dialogue and conversation was also.
You mentioned tariffs. You've been a leader on this issue in Congress and the House of Representatives. Republican leadership in the chamber have sought to prevent any tariff disapproval resolution votes from coming up through I'm not going to get into the wonkiness of House procedure here, but essentially in order to bring a bill to the floor, you need to pass a rule through the Rules Committee, and what they've done is they've used the Rules Committee to make it such that that privilege to have that vote on the floor is turned off. Meanwhile, in the Senate, those votes are still going to be happening. It's going to put additional pressure on Republicans. You've been in Congress a long time. You've seen the sort of this evolution that we're seeing among Republicans of, being ardently free trade, right? Like opposing tariffs very ardently, saying they are taxes, to now being okay with Donald Trump, imposing these tariffs really across the board on nations like South Africa, as you mentioned, on some of our biggest trading partners as well. What is your outlook on the tariffs issue right now, especially given that you don't have the ability right now to force these votes on the House floor for something that is normally privileged?
So one is through the courts. And you see that we have won through some of the lower courts.
Right.
The decisions have said that tariffs are to be determined by Congress, and that the justification that the president has been utilizing to impose the tariffs are not true justifications. For example, when you look at the reasons that he tried to impose them on Canada and Mexico, saying because fentanyl was crossing the borders, that's not an appropriate justification, and that is something that the Constitution gives the Congress the right to determine. And that's the bill that you're saying that you understand that is being blocked. And so one of the things that I am doing is I have what we call, again, I don't want to get into the wonkiness.
Discharge petition.
Discharge petition, which will then override what the Speaker's prevention of the bill on the floor does. And we are getting close to where I will just need 3 Republicans to sign on, and we can have a vote on the floor where it should be. So we're continuing to press that issue so that we can, and to me, it should be completely bipartisan, because for the first time, I'm seeing where, because of my Republican parties, they are only doing what the president says to do or not to do. So the president has become the de facto speaker of the House of Representatives, which the Constitution said we're supposed to be separate but equal branches of government and be able to do oversight of what the executive branch does, not to rubber stamp what the executive does. So I'm hopeful that we will get the number of Republicans to sign on to the bill so that we can have a vote on the House floor as the Constitution declares should take place.
You're also very close to getting 218 signatures for a separate discharge petition on Russia sanctions. This is an issue that there is new momentum for, given Vladimir Putin's latest airspace incursions, both into Poland, into Estonia. It seems like he's really trying to poke NATO nations in the eye here in light of, in the aftermath, at least, of his meeting with President Trump here in the United States of America, in Alaska, of course. What is your outlook right now on the chances of putting additional economic pressure on Putin? Again, I was talking about this with Senator Whitehouse as well, but it seems like there is a willingness on the part of the Republican leadership to just defer to the White House on these very important foreign policy questions rather than have Congress determine them on its own, as you say, a co-equal branch of government.
Yeah, so there's a challenge. There's a challenge for my Republican colleagues. Every Democrat has signed on to the bill to discharge. We now have one Republican that has signed on.
Don Bacon.
Don Bacon.
Who's retiring.
Who's retiring.
Right.
And I think that we have others who are retiring. And so I'm hopeful that they will stand up. There was a saying back when President Biden was there that we needed to make sure that we have peace through strength. What is happening here with what the Trump administration, he's not showing peace through strength. He's showing weakness through appeasement. He's appeasing and doing whatever Vladimir Putin says and allows to happen, and not giving the Ukrainians what they need to defend themselves. And I think that if you review the timeline, you will see that when the United States was stepping up, along with our European and NATO allies, and giving the Ukrainians what it needed, they were actually winning this war. It is when we stopped giving it to them that the Russians began to take advantage. And unfortunately, I am very mindful of what Donald Trump said prior to him being elected president. Basically what he said, let Russia do whatever the hell they want to do. And it seems under his presidency, that's what's happening. You see the difference between when Mr. Zelensky came to the White House and how he was treated. And as you've just correctly indicated, when he had Vladimir Putin step on American soil, he rolled out the red carpet. He has said that Ukrainians were the aggressors in the war, when in fact the whole world knows it was Russia who invaded Ukraine. So I'm hopeful that my colleagues, and there was this saying about this is a Churchill moment. And this is, it's Chamberlain versus Churchill. Right. And I think that, and I hope, because many of my Republican colleagues use that expression under the Biden administration, I'm hoping that they remind themselves of that and they come out and have a Churchill moment and do the right thing, what has set a world order that we have been able to live with for over the last 75 years or so.
And the sanctions legislation would be truly unprecedented in terms of putting secondary sanctions, or imposing secondary sanctions, which essentially mean we're sanctioning people, nations that might be allies of ours that are still to this day purchasing Russian energy, things like oil, uranium, so that would certainly have a big impact on the Russian war machine. I want to pivot real quick to this issue of Palestinian statehood. As you know, this week the UK, Canada, Australia, and now France have formally recognized Palestine as a state. Here at home, as you know, calls for suspending weapon shipments to Israel have become a tension point within the Democratic Party on Capitol Hill. When it comes to this issue of Palestinian statehood, where do you fall on that debate? Do you think it's something that would be helpful at this point to engage in a conversation on, and what do you make of these allies of ours deciding to do it?
So I don't think that you can ever have real peace in the Middle East without a two-state solution. I am a strong supporter of the two-state solution. But I do believe that you get there through negotiations and dialogue. And I think that conversation has to continue. I have concerns when I look at not only what's happening in Gaza, but when you have the settlements in the West Bank, because if there's no territory, then there can be no two-state solution. And so there have to be that kind of dialogue taking place now, so that we can work toward a two-state solution. But I do believe a two-state solution there needs to be negotiations and dialogue, and I would hope that there could be someone from the Palestinians, a leader that could rise, that could be at the table to talk to the Israelis, in this case Mr. Netanyahu, so that we can get toward a two-state solution. I am concerned by some of the statements made by Mr. Netanyahu recently, basically saying there cannot be a two-state solution, and some of the statements and the activities that are taking place in Gaza right now. Mm-hmm. We need an immediate end to the war in Gaza. We need the hostages returned home, and we need to begin to have conversations about the future to get to a two-state solution. We must make sure that Hamas has nothing to do with the being a part of a two-state solution, and not at that negotiating table, and have no power in the potential of having a two-state solution. So there's work to be done. It's not something that's going to take place overnight, but I think that it's a process, and what I was reminded by the South African president was that it was what the beginning was for them, and how and why they were so vocal about it is because of apartheid in South Africa. So I'm hopeful that dialogue, negotiations will happen for a two-state solution, but first must happen is the war in Gaza must end.
Congressman Gregory Meeks, ranking member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee and of New York's 5th Congressional District, right here in New York. Congressman, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I'm very pleased to be joined this morning by Congresswoman Young Kim, Republican of California's 40th Congressional District, as well as the chair of the East Asia and Pacific Subcommittee of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Congresswoman, thank you so much for being here. We at Punchbowl News, we cover power, people, and politics that drive the decision-making in our nation's capital. You can subscribe to our morning newsletter. It's free at punchbowl.news. And again, we were pleased to be partnering this year with the World Economic Forum at the annual UN General Assembly. Congresswoman, a lot happening in the world right now, a lot of conflicts in global hotspots, namely Eastern Europe and the Middle East. But the pacing threat of China continues to be the dominant sort of issue at the forefront here. And you have done your part to make sure that Americans and really all citizens of the world do not forget about that fact. I want to get your perspective on all of that, but first start with the meetings that you are having this week here in New York during the congressional recess when you get some time away from Washington, which is always nice to get away from Washington, right? I can speak from firsthand experience. I know you can as well. Just the importance of expanding ties with some of these Pacific Island nations in order to leverage those ties to be a bulwark against China and their growing influence, as well as actions to deepen existing ties with larger nations like Japan and South Korea, for example. I understand you have some interesting meetings this week with some of those Pacific Island nations.
Well, there's a lot to pack right there, but let me first thank you, Andrew. It's good to be back with you, having this very important conversation about what's going on around the world. And that is why I think it's very, very important for me to be here representing the United States at the UN General Assembly. There is a lot of world leaders gathered here, and we will be listening in and participating and having meetings, bilateral or multilateral meetings. So I'm really looking forward to that. Also, in addition to serving as chair of the Subcommittee on East Asia and the Pacific, I serve on the Select Committee on our strategic competition between U.S. and Chinese Communist Party. So, you know, having the strategic strategy to counter China's growing influence and its bullying tactics, especially against our key allies and partners in the region. Namely, the Pacific Island nations are being bullied more so than any other places. And that's why, as one of my key foreign policy priorities, I made it a point to travel to the region, one, to show them that U.S. is engaged, we are showing up, and we want to make sure that China is not the dominant factor on the world stage, exercising their influences. So that's why we've been doing it, and identifying the growing threats from our adversaries is important, but working on deterrent strategy together with our allies is important. So I'll be meeting with some Southeast Asian nations as well as South Asia, including Republic of Korea's new president Lee Jae-myung. So I'm really looking forward to having those conversations. We also saw the China's continuing provocation in the Taiwan Strait. We saw recently in China, as they were having the massive military parade, and Xi Jinping hosted some of our adversaries, like North Korea's Kim Jong-un, Russia's Putin. And obviously that really goes to show you how he is building on the unholy alliance that has been building up for the last several years, if not decades. So my position is to make sure that we meet with our counterparts, our adversaries, friends, and allies to build a holy alliance to counter Xi Jinping and CCP's growing influence in the Indo-Pacific region. Indo-Pacific is the priority theater, and again, we need to work together to counter and bring the balance in the region.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you mentioned the recent military parade that Xi Jinping had, where he brought together his allies, but our sort of common adversaries, that being, as you mentioned, Russia's Vladimir Putin, North Korea's Kim Jong-un. What went through your mind seeing that, seeing how they were sort of paraded through the streets of Beijing for a military parade? What was going through your head as you saw that?
Basically, it is a clear indication that Xi Jinping is sending a message not only to the United States, but to our friends that work against the disruption that Xi Jinping and unholy alliance will bring to, keeping the free and open Indo-Pacific. And so it gave me more resolve to work in Congress in the position that I'm in, and along with my colleagues, to make sure that we are bringing our allies and partners together and continue this engagement, which is also a reason why I'm here at UNGA this way, building relationships, talking about what are the contingency plan if Xi Jinping continues to bring the aggression in the Taiwan Strait. We are worried about the potential blockade. There are already talks about cutting the undersea cables around the Taiwan island. There is a contingency plan that we need to put in place by working with our allies, whether that is done through bilateral, U.S.-Korea, U.S.-Japan, or in the trilateral format by working closely with Japan and South Korea with our U.S. leadership there. But we also need to look at the multilateral format. That could be through AUKUS, that could be through Quad, that could be through working with our Southeast Asian nations. This has to be done both with the economic and military and security alliances working together. Southeast Asian countries like ASEAN, for example, it is the largest trading bloc in the United States. We cannot forget that. So I've been for a long time working on providing diplomatic recognition and immunity to the ASEAN nations working in Washington, D.C. through the Partner with ASEAN Act. We'll talk about that a little later, but in terms of what's happened recently in Georgia with the raid, I think the momentum is building about bringing some common sense solution, and that is to work on Partner with Korea Act. And in our engagement, especially with South Korea and with our allies and partners, I hope they raise the issue of how important it is in their engagement with our State Department and our White House officials. it is time to partner with Korea and provide Korea with 15,000 E4 visa categories so they can continue to bring in the investments that we need, but also they will be able to bring in highly skilled labor workforce so they can establish their factories, the battery plants, and train those workforces, and then they can go back. It is a tremendous economic boom as well as opportunity to hire more people, and so I think that is another solution.
You mentioned the State Department. There's a lot happening on Capitol Hill right now, but last week there was a very important committee markup in the Foreign Affairs Committee, and that was for the annual State Department authorization. You secured a number of provisions in that annual package. One was this piece of legislation called the Profit Act, and I know you talk a lot about how economic security is national security. Can you sort of talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I always say economic security is national security. Economic policy is national policy, and so Profit Act that you're talking about is part of the overall State Department authorization bill that we worked on. I mean, this was probably the longest markup that anyone has seen. It's gone on probably over 36 hours.
Yeah. Did you stay awake the whole time?
Yes, we did, because I had a number of provisions and amendments that I was speaking on, and it was very important that we stay awake. I think we kind of accomplished that. But Profit Act is the economic title within the whole State Department authorization bill that we marked up. The whole purpose is to provide the economic policy and economic diplomatic tool so we can focus on helping U.S. businesses gain market access abroad and also help protect our U.S. businesses from predatory foreign competitions. And I think that is really important. For too long, we've seen at the State Department, economic statecraft is fractured. It's been split across multiple agencies, and it really didn't give our foreign commercial service officers working overseas the diplomatic, the tool they needed to negotiate on behalf of the United States and providing and helping the U.S. businesses the market access they need. So the legislation created a couple of bureaus like the Commercial Diplomacy Bureau and also the Economic Security and Diplomacy Bureau. These are all geared towards ensuring that our State Department and officials have the tools they need, especially the Energy Security and Diplomacy Bureau is really dedicated to securing the critical mineral supply chains. As you saw during the April when China put a restriction on export controls on the critical mineral supplies, the rare earth elements from China coming to the United States, we saw the vulnerability of our U.S. production needs. So that is in response to that. Through the Energy Security and Diplomacy Bureau, we will be able to coordinate better with our, not just within the United States, building up our processing and defense production capability. We will be able to work with our partners. That is another reason why included in that is the idea of enhancing and strengthening MSP, which is Mineral Security Partnership. My colleague and I, Ami Bera, ranking member of my subcommittee, this is a bipartisan legislation. We want to work with our allies to increase the capability of mining. So mining and processing, and especially the down to the downstream, the manufacturing sector.
Another really important issue when we talk about trying to counter China's global influence is recognizing the fact that China is using these multilateral organizations to try to expand its global power. Organizations like the World Health Organization, the IMF, the International Civil Aviation Organization, the chairman and ranking member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Brian Mast, and Gregory Meeks, who we'll talk with as well for this episode. They sent a letter to the ICAO recently, urging them to include Taiwan, for example, in their next triennial meeting. At the same time, China is moving to unilaterally extend a flight route in the Taiwan Strait. what can you say right now about what China is doing through these international organizations, and how important it is to get the leadership of those organizations to, number one, recognize that, and number two, make sure that Taiwan is at the table when these decisions are being made?
Look, Andrew, I think it's very, very clear that Beijing does not want to provide Taiwan with any legitimacy at all. And so they do a lot of, they go out of their way to resort to bullying tactics. They use economic coercion. They use bribes to get Taiwan, Taiwan out of the international organizations. I've been calling for Taiwan's inclusion in all of those critical international organizations. IMF, for one, I have a legislation, Taiwan Non-Discrimination Act. They deserve to have a seat at the table. And now that we are working on the legislation, passing it, hopefully when Taiwan asks for a seat at IMF, United States will lend our support and ensure that they can be included. Taiwan is also a key global health partner, so having a seat at the table within World Health Organization, it is to our advantage. We have more to gain. Taiwan has proven over and over how critical health partner that it is. So why not give them a seat at World Health Organization? You know, in the past, we have given them the observer status, and it, again, helps the world, you know, especially with their expertise, that we can gain and learn more from them. Another thing is, of course, as you mentioned, the ICAO, International Civil Aviation Organization. We need to ensure that Taiwan has the information that is coming up, especially when there is China sending those aircraft towards the Taiwan. They need to be able to know exactly when it's occurring, right, before it's too late. So inclusion of Taiwan in ICAO, IMF, World Health Organization, these are critically important, and I stand with my colleagues in a bipartisan, bicameral way, and I will continue to advocate for Taiwan's inclusion in international organizations.
Was it the right decision for the Trump administration to pull the U.S. out of the World Health Organization? Because a lot has been made of the importance of, you know, the U.S. showing up at these organizations in order to serve as a better bulwark against China's growing influence.
Sure. You know, President Trump called for reforms at the World Health Organization, and he justified it by saying that there is several failures that we've seen. There has been a slow COVID response, and there has been less independence from China. China dominates and has a lot of voice and exercises influence there. And then there is a poor transparency, and it relies overly on U.S. Supporting. And again, we are the largest, you know, donor to the WHO. So those frustration is justified. However, I truly believe if we want to make a difference and have influence, we need to be involved in the international organizations. If U.S. steps back, China steps in and fills the void. We have seen it over and over. And so we need to stay engaged, and especially if we want to be the leader on the world stage. Stay engaged. We need to stand with our allies and support our allies and partners in the region and around the globe. That is so important.
We are almost running out of time, but I do want to ask you about the latest
may I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes.
Yes.
On that. So I just want to say World Health Organization is not the only player, right? You need to understand there are other proven global health organizations such as Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, right, the Global Fund, CEPI, which is the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation. They have proven to be an effective leader in bringing the cost-effective you know, solutions, such as, you know, helping to fund producing the ready-to-use therapeutic food, as well as working on the prenatal multivitamin supplements. These are critically important to help pregnant women stay healthy through the full term so they can deliver healthy babies. These are critically important, and we need, Congress has consistently provided funds through the appropriations, and I've supported it consistently as well. So I think we need to utilize those private organizations because they bring in private sector and the expertise that other organizations or WHO alone cannot do.
Right, absolutely. Lastly, I do want to ask you about the latest with Russia and Ukraine. The UN Security Council is today actually convening a special emergency session to discuss Russia's latest airspace incursions into Estonia. They did so a couple of weeks into Poland. It seems like ever since Vladimir Putin came to the United States, came to Alaska to meet with President Trump, Russia keeps poking NATO, if you will, trying to test NATO's resolve. Is it time for Congress to pass new sanctions legislation to ramp up that economic pressure on Putin?
I think Putin knows nothing but power. So when President Trump leads with strength, we are able to bring Putin to the table, and we saw that recently when they met in Alaska. Putin, needs to know that Congress is paying attention, and we're going to rally our partners, allies, like-minded nations that are here gathered at UNGA. They will need to know that United States Congress just passed the Sanctioning Russia Act. I was a co-sponsor of that. This Sanctions Act will impose extensive economic penalties on Russia. We need to send a unified, bipartisan, hopefully bicameral push to cut off any opportunity for Putin to finance its ongoing war there. I truly believe sanctions and tariff are a powerful tool that will get Putin back on the negotiating table, and we need to do that. The Russian drones and jets that's flown over Polish and Estonian is yet again a clear example of how Putin's aggression is not going to end just in Ukraine. So we need to stop this war as soon as possible.
Congresswoman, I know you've got a busy week ahead of you planned. Thank you so much for taking the time to stop by and having this discussion. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me.
I'm pleased to be joined now by Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, Democrat from Rhode Island. He's the ranking member of the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. He's also the ranking member of the U.S. Helsinki Commission. Senator, thank you so much for joining us today.
Good to be with you.
Thank you. Well, I want to start off with Climate Week, the annual gathering here in New York that happens alongside the UN General Assembly. This event this year is really an antidote of sorts to what we're seeing out of the Trump administration, right? The rollback of pollution standards, what we're seeing Republicans in Congress supporting as well, sort of aligned with that goal of the Trump administration. From your perspective as someone who attends a lot of these international climate-focused summits, how are U.S. allies reacting to what they've seen so far, not even a year into the Trump administration?
Well, I think generally they're holding fairly steady. The Trump administration has put enormous tariff pressure on them, and some of that tariff pressure has been an effort to dissuade them from continuing with very useful climate policies, like, for instance, the European Union's carbon border adjustment mechanism. But they put a lot of work into it. And I think there's a little bit of resentment building up at the high-handed way that the Trump administration tries to deal with them. And I think there's a true recognition in many of the capitals around the world that climate change is a really dangerous situation, and it's getting worse fast. And the fact that the fossil fuel industry controls the Trump administration is no reason to back away from what they know to be the right thing. So it's a combination of forces, but the effect, I think, has been fairly good.
The carbon border adjustment mechanism that the EU is going to be implementing next year, you just mentioned that. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what your goal is with trying to sort of promote that here in the United States and also to promote it to other countries that might be considering taking similar action?
Sure. Well, to go back a step, the Potsdam Institute has looked at 1,200 different climate scenarios that have been presented over the years to the IPCC. There are 11 of 1,200 that still remain giving us a viable pathway to climate safety. All 11 require that there be a price on carbon emissions. The fossil fuel free to pollute business model is lethal to our success in the climate crisis. So we have to get around that, and if you're looking for a place where that exists, it's the CBAM. It's a tariff that an importer to the EU pays if it isn't imposing pollution controls and penalties equivalent to what the EU is imposing. Right. It's growing. The UK is getting ready to join. Australia is getting ready to join. Nobody knows more about what climate change is going to do to ruin financial systems than Mark Carney, the Prime Minister of Canada. So I'm hoping that Canada also will join. We could get Mexico, potentially others involved. So it could become quite a good-sized platform that actually imposes the price on carbon emissions that is necessary for our success.
And the imports that it would apply to are what are called carbon-intensive products, right? Things like steel, cement. Is it possible that
chemicals?
Is it possible that this could be expanded to other types of imports, you think?
Yeah, it's going to continue to be expanded. They've got a schedule that they will roll it out. It also is for obviously major suppliers, because there's no point chasing people who aren't contributing much to the problem. One interesting thing about the CBAM that I'd want to mention is that if it goes into effect and the United States does nothing, we're still winners.
Why is that?
Because the penalty on China is 3 times higher than the penalty on US. So it creates a sufficient motive for EU businesses to do business with the United States instead of with China. It cuts way into China's economic advantage over the United States, and it's predicted to increase American business activity.
Well, that's what I was going to ask too, is do you think something like the CBAM is possible, feasible in the United States? Obviously not under a Trump administration and a Republican-controlled Congress, but would that be a feasible sort of blueprint for a future Democratic administration and Democratic Congress to try to impose?
Well, I have a carbon tariff bill, but there's also a Republican carbon tariff bill. And Senator Cassidy and Graham, who are working on the Republican one, have been working with us off the same sort of technical platform of advice. So while we're not matching with our bills yet, it is a bipartisan effort. The Trump administration has told us that they're going to try to work with us. Their trade representative and the Secretary of the Treasury, they've all said, if a foreign country is getting an economic advantage against U.S. competition by not meeting our environmental standards, that is what tariffs are for. And so the notion that we would tariff imports that don't meet our pollution standards, I think has a pretty strong basis in principle and also in economic reward. So that just leaves the malign force of the fossil fuel industry to try to undo it. But I think there's a lot of logic to joining with a tariff of our own. Then the test becomes, can we get freed from the EU tariff? Separate but related question.
You've talked a lot about how everybody is impacted by climate change, but one acute, direct way that people could feel the impact and connect that impact to climate change directly is when it comes to what you warn about, the systemic economic danger stemming from the impact of climate change on insurance markets.
Correct.
And the cascading impact that could have on mortgage and property markets as well. We've seen polls that show that voters increasingly connect the increased frequency of extreme weather events with higher insurance premiums.
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about this and why it's something that you think is an important element of this conversation?
Yeah. Well, I would say there are 2 elements to this. One is the personal experience of just regular Americans who, in locations all across the country, are experiencing sudden massive increases in their homeowners insurance premium, or getting a letter from the insurance company saying, we don't want to insure you any longer, you have to go find another insurer. In some cases, it gets really difficult because if they can't find an insurer, their mortgage holder goes to find an insurer and bills them with the mortgage cost, the new insurance cost, which is much, 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 much higher.
You need insurance to get a mortgage, in other words.
You need insurance to get a mortgage, but once you've got a mortgage, you need to maintain your insurance, lest that be an incident for foreclosure. So people are really locked into this. It's a very big number in their lives, and they understand that the original cause of all of this is the uncertainty about extreme weather, whether it's wildfire weather or coastal storms, and it's happening broadly all across the country. So from a point of view of an individual American family, this becomes a very important kitchen table issue. Pop up to the more broad economic horizon, and you're looking at an issue where climate risk makes insurance too unpredictable to offer. insurance fails, taking down mortgage markets, because as you said, you need insurance to get a mortgage. When mortgage markets fail, property prices fall, unless you're billionaires playing with mansions like checker pieces. But for regular people who have a mortgage on their house and need to sell it to somebody who will need a mortgage to make their price, when there are no mortgages, and by the way, the Secretary of the Treasury about 6 months ago warned that 10 to 15 years, there'll be whole regions of the United States where mortgages are simply no longer available. So that causes the property values crash, and that, we've been warned, can cascade out into the economy like the 2008 mortgage meltdown did, leading to what the Economist magazine mentioned as a potential $25 trillion hit to global real estate markets. So there's this huge looming economic cloud on the horizon that the fossil fuel industry would like us not to see, and there's the personal direct experience of American families getting really punched in the nose by climate-driven insurance costs.
What can Congress do about this?
Well, the first thing to do is to make sure that people understand why it happens, because it's going to continue to get worse for as long as the fossil fuel industry maintains its chokehold on Congress.
But policy-wise, I mean, is there legislation? Is there something, some way this could be addressed in a direct sort of manner?
The attempts that have been made to address this have been things like the flight to the state-backed insurance programs when people can't get insurance any longer on the regular market. That's a kind of mixed blessing, because the states aren't necessarily all that sound in terms of the policy that they offer. They tend to be bare bones coverage, and you don't have a very strong customer relationship when basically you're their captive because you've got no place else to go, rather than working with the regular private sector insurer who's been your insurer, you know, since you bought the house 15 years ago, whatever your story is.
Right. I want to shift gears. I mentioned earlier you are the ranking member of the U.S. Helsinki Commission.
Yep.
You have been very active in terms of legislating as it relates to the Russia-Ukraine war. You successfully got passed a bill called the Repo Act,
Yep.
which, just for the benefit of the audience, essentially allows frozen sovereign Russian assets to be transferred to Ukraine for their use for reconstruction purposes of their country, which has been ravaged by war caused by the Russians. You and Senator Risch, the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, have a sort of a sequel to that which is now law that you announced last week. It's called the Repo Implementation Act.
Yep.
Can you tell us about that?
Yes. It's not only Senator Risch, it's also Senator Grassley, the chairman of Judiciary,
Right.
and Senator Graham, perhaps the most ardent pro-Ukraine advocate in the Senate. And on my side, it's Senator Shaheen, who's the ranking member on foreign relations, and Senator Blumenthal, who matches Graham in advocacy for
They're
Ukraine.
like that duo, yeah.
Yeah, so it's a very strong half-dozen senators, bipartisan, who are pushing for this. It signals to the administration that not only need they move forward with seizing the frozen assets that we have and sending them to Ukraine, but that they should work with the EU community to try to not only seize all of the Russian assets, but to do so on a regular, predictable schedule.
Quarterly, right?
Quarterly would be ideal. We're not fussy about exactly how. It's $330 billion, give or take. If that all gets seized and sent to Ukraine at once, it doesn't have much impact on Putin. But if every month or every quarter there's another $25 billion that's gone forever, another $25 billion that's gone forever, another $25 billion that's gone forever, that relentless pound will get his attention, will influence his economy, and bring pressure to bear so that he stops the war crimes, or at least has a bigger incentive to stop the war crimes. So we're trying to build that pressure, and we've heard that there are actually voices within the Trump administration that are sympathetic to the idea, and indeed there was one proposal talked about, instead of 25, 25, 25, do 10, 20, 40, 80, and again, either is fine. The point is you have to put intense economic pressure on Russia to end its illegal and inhumane conduct in Ukraine.
Last year, you and I were talking at the Munich Security Conference because your goal there was to get the Europeans on board with this concept of using the seized Russian assets to transfer to Ukraine. So you didn't just have to convince your colleagues in Congress and ultimately the administration, which was the Biden administration at the time, to get behind it. You had to convince our European allies because they had questions about this, right? They were skittish about it at first,
yes.
right?
Most of the money is held in an entity called Euroclear, which is run by Belgian bankers. And at the moment, the decision about how we put economic pressure on Putin and end the war in Ukraine is being made by those Belgian bankers. I got nothing against Belgian bankers, but they're not the people who should be making that decision. Right. Not if this is a war that we want Ukraine to win. So they are coming around. The first step was to pledge interest on their frozen funds to fund a distribution to Ukraine, and they did that. Mm-hmm. And now they've agreed on another proposal to take about half of the money, 150 billion, and move it into a new account from which the interest would go to Ukraine and which would be pledged against a massive loan to Ukraine. And this would be the collateral. So at the end of the day, Ukraine collects on that collateral unless Russia has come in and made good the difference. So it's another big step forward by the European Union towards transferring the value of the frozen assets to Ukraine. It's a little bit more complicated and multi-step than simply freezing and sending, but they are moving steadily in the right direction, which is good to see.
We're talking about moving in concert with European allies. You also mentioned increasing economic pressure, the need to increase economic pressure on Putin to sort of disincentivize him from continuing the war in Ukraine. The sanctions bill from Senators Graham and Blumenthal right now in the Senate seems to be the best hope for some sort of congressional action in the near future on this. But the Republican leadership, as you know, in the Senate is saying that they're not going to put any bill on the floor related to sanctions until and unless it has the blessing of the White House and of President Trump. I know you've talked to Senate Republicans who are wary of that posture. I've talked to Senate Republicans who are wary of that posture. They don't think that the Senate or Congress in general really should be giving up so much of its authority on matters of foreign policy like this to the administration. Can you talk a little bit about any hope that you see for legislation on this front to try to increase that economic pressure on Putin as he continues to just thumb his nose at NATO and the United States?
And President Trump specifically. Mm-hmm. I see this in the nature of a conversation between the Senate in a very bipartisan basis and the administration. And what the Senate has put forward is the Graham-Blumenthal sanctions proposal. Just recently, John Kennedy's, senator from Louisiana's, proposal to emphasize distribution of funds to Ukraine from the frozen assets. Mm-hmm. And then the state sponsor of terror designation has been kicked around for a while.
Yeah.
Those three things get a lot of bipartisan support. The sanctions bill, I think, is north of 80 co-sponsors. So it sends a very powerful signal as these things continue to be developed in the Senate to the Trump administration. You've got to pick up your game here, and when you do, we'll support you on that. So that message is very, very important. Then you get to the question of when do you pass the actual law and how does that work? And at the moment, I think the messaging effect is the primary effect, but there's a lot that the Trump administration can do, even without that law, to increase pressure. Particularly, I think the international focus on the shadow fleet that is helping Russia export its oil and gas, which creates the revenues that supports the army that allows the terror to continue in Ukraine.
Well, certainly there's momentum towards some sort of congressional action right now, especially as we've seen these aerial incursions into NATO airspace in both Poland and Estonia. Obviously, the Security Council convened an emergency meeting today on that very subject. We're going to have to leave it there. Senator Sheldon, Whitehouse, thank you so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it here, and good luck this week.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. You can continue the conversation using the hashtag SDIM25, as well as at our website, punchbowl.news, where you can subscribe to our free morning newsletter. Thanks again.